Welcome, dear subscribers and curious listeners of my channel. Today we're stepping into a place that rarely received the attention it deserved in the films, yet played a meaningful role in the books. Of course, we're talking about Hogsmeade, the only entirely magical village in Great Britain. This hidden corner, invisible to Muggle eyes, holds many secrets and fascinating stories. Let's rediscover what makes it so special and what the movie franchise left behind. Enjoy watching. Number 1. The Hogwarts Express stops at Hogsmeade. Many viewers may not have noticed, the magical train doesn't actually arrive at Hogwarts. It stops at Hogsmeade Station, from which students are brought to the castle. First years take a romantic boat ride across the Black Lake, while older students walk along a scenic path. The station was built in the early 19th century. The Ministry of Magic decided it was safer to put students on trains rather than broomsticks, and so began a tradition we all recognize today. Number 2, the only all-wizarding village. There are few places in the magical world where wizards can live openly and freely. Hogsmeade is one of those rare exceptions. It is the only settlement in Britain where no Muggles live. In other villages and towns, wizards must constantly hide who they are. But Hogsmeade lies right next to Hogwarts, and so the Ministry deemed it acceptable to leave it fully under magical control, to avoid accidental run-ins between Muggles and students. Number 3, founded by Hengist of Woodcroft. The village's history goes back to the heart of the medieval era. Its founder was Hengist of Woodcroft, a Hufflepuff alumnus. Legend has it he may have even studied under Helga Hufflepuff herself. Persecuted by Muggles, Hengist fled his homeland and found refuge at the foot of the mountains, near what would later become Hogwarts. There he founded Hogsmeade, a quiet, magical haven. This origin story explains why the village remains entirely magical to this day. It was born out of exile and a desire for safety. Number 4, students weren't always allowed to visit. Hard to imagine, but Hogwarts students weren't always free to wander Hogsmeade's charming streets. It wasn't until 1714 that a special decree granted permission for upper year students, third years and above, to visit on certain weekends. That right could be easily revoked. Neville lost his Hogsmeade privileges for misplacing the Gryffindor passwords. Harry lost his after an interview with the Quibbler. Umbridge seized the opportunity to punish him. As for younger students, they could only envy the lucky few and dream of their turn. Number 5, the Invisibility Hat and other shops. The films portray Hogsmeade as a weekend retreat, drinks, laughs and butterbeer. But that's only the surface. Hogsmeade is also a marketplace, a community hub, a place where you can find everything, from Fred and George's pranks to gifts for house elves. In Goblet of Fire, the trio visits the Invisibility Hat shop to buy socks for Dobby. They find a pair that screams when not washed often enough. The shop was founded in 1750 and has been delighting witches and wizards with eccentric items ever since. It's not just a store, it's part of the culture. Number 6, a strategic post during the Goblin Rebellion. Hogsmeade wasn't always about treats and trinkets. In 1612, it became the backdrop to far more serious events. A major Goblin Rebellion broke out nearby, and one of the village's inns was turned into a wizarding headquarters. It's a reminder that even in the magical world, there's no peace without struggle. Goblins fought for their rights. Wizards fought to maintain control. And Hogsmeade became a silent witness to that conflict. Number 7, the Shrieking Shack, more than a haunted house. Everyone feared the Shrieking Shack. Students swore it was haunted. Locals crossed the street to avoid it. Screams echoed through its rotting walls on full moon nights. But there were no ghosts inside, only Remus Lupin, a boy, a werewolf, a secret. Dumbledore had it built in 1971, hidden on the edge of Hogsmeade, connected by a secret tunnel from the Whomping Willow. "The tunnel was built for me alone," Lupin once told Harry. "I was dangerous, but Dumbledore believed I deserved to learn." The house groaned, scratched, cried out in agony, sounds no one dared to investigate. The enchantments were strong. Wards made sure no curious soul could get near. And when Lupin transformed, he was alone in that pain. The marauders, James, Sirius and Peter, became animagi just to be with him. We couldn't let him suffer, Sirius said. So we transformed. Every full moon we joined him. And they turned the House of Howls into a place of loyalty. Years later, in The Prisoner of Azkaban, it became the stage for truth. Harry, Ron, and Hermione followed Sirius there, thinking him a killer. But the truth unravelled in that shack. Pettigrew's betrayal, Lupin's past, Snape's rage. The house wasn't haunted by ghosts, it was haunted by choices, pain, love, and secrets that shaped an entire war. Number 8. The Three Broomsticks and its secrets. The Three Broomsticks always smelled of cinnamon, wood smoke, and butterbeer. Warm light spilled from its windows, drawing in students like moths. Harry, Ron, and Hermione claimed a table there almost every Hogsmeade visit. It was safe, familiar, full of voices and clinking mugs. But behind the warmth, the pub had secrets, whispers, plans. It was here, in The Prisoner of Azkaban, that Harry overheard McGonagall, Flitwick, Hagrid, and Cornelius Fudge speaking about Sirius Black. "He killed them," Fudge said, voice low and heavy. That moment changed everything. Madame Rosmerta ran the place with charm and sharp eyes. She poured drinks, passed gossip, and never missed a detail. Everyone liked her, everyone trusted her. That made it all the more horrifying when, in The Half-Blood Prince, she was placed under the Imperious Curse by Draco Malfoy. Unwillingly, she helped pass along the cursed necklace meant to kill Dumbledore. She didn't know what she was doing, Dumbledore later told Harry. And that was true, but it didn't make the betrayal sting less. The pub stood through it all, through war, death, fear. Even when Hogsmeade grew silent, when students stopped laughing and shadows crept through the streets, the Three Broomsticks stayed open. A fire always burned in the hearth, a quiet defiance. Rosmerta kept serving butterbeer, not just for thirst, but to remind everyone that light still lived in dark places. Number 9. Secret romances at Madame Puddifoot's. Madame Puddifoot's tea shop looked like it had exploded in lace and pink. Hearts floated from the ceiling. Little cherubs blew kisses over teacups. It was Valentine's Day, and Harry Potter had no idea what he was walking into. He'd invited Cho Chang thinking it would be quiet. Instead, they were crammed between couples holding hands and sharing peppermint truffles. "It's like being smothered by a doily," Ron would later joke. Harry didn't laugh. The date was a disaster. Cho cried. Harry panicked. He started talking about Hermione a lot. "I suppose you're going to meet her now?" Cho snapped, voice trembling. Harry tried to explain, but words twisted, hearts cracked, cherubs scattered. By the time he stumbled out into the cold, their budding relationship was already wilting. The tea shop, once dreamy, had become a battlefield of awkward silences and misunderstood glances. But Madame Puddifoot's saw more than just heartbreak. The place became a legend. Older students warned the younger ones. If your love can survive an afternoon in that tea shop, it can survive anything. Some even claimed Madame Puddifoot enchanted the space, testing the strength of feelings through romantic chaos. No spell, no potion, no prophecy could reveal a heart faster than a pink-frosted scone and the wrong sentence at the wrong time. Number 10. Zonko's vs. Weasley's Wizard Wheezes. Before there was Weasley's Wizard Wheezes, there was Zonko's. Nestled right on the main street of Hogsmeade, it was the ultimate destination for any Hogwarts student with a taste for chaos. Trick wands, hiccup sweets, and dung bombs lined the shelves in organized mischief. Fred and George Weasley practically lived there during their third year. "Zonko's has everything," George once whispered to Lee Jordan, holding up a pair of nose-biting teacups. It wasn't just a shop, it was a dream in Technicolor packaging. Fred and George didn't just shop there, they studied it, the layout, the customer flow, the laughter behind every purchase. When they finally opened their own shop in Diagon Alley, Zonko's was their blueprint, but theirs was bigger, wilder, crazier, with puking pastilles and skiving snack boxes. Still, they never forgot their roots. "Zonko's gave us our first dung bomb," Fred said proudly. "We just took it further." It was a passing of the torch, a prankster's legacy. After the rise of Voldemort, Zonko's closed its doors. Dark times don't mix well with laughter, but even boarded up, its windows dusty and cracked, the place still whispered with magic. Younger students pressed their noses to the glass, imagining what once was. Fred and George made sure it didn't vanish completely. Their wheezes became a beacon of joy in wartime and a living tribute to Zonko's unbreakable spirit. Number 11. The Owl Post Office with magical deliveries. The Hogsmeade Post Office was nothing like the cold, grey owlery at Hogwarts. This place buzzed with feathers and clicking beaks, walls lined with perches, rows of owls sleeping, preening or blinking with calm purpose. But it wasn't just about sending letters, it was a system. Owls were sorted not by who they were delivering to, but by how far they could fly and how fast they could get there. "Express or standard delivery?" the clerk would ask, already eyeing a screech owl twitching with excitement. Harry came here more than once. When he couldn't use Hedwig, or when the message was too important. He once used a large tawny owl to send a letter to Sirius in the Goblet of Fire, writing nervously on the counter while Ron browsed Enchanted stationery. "Just be careful," Hermione whispered. "The Ministry watches everything now." The owls didn't care. They waited, silent and solemn, bound to their task. There was even a rumor that one owl, an ancient horned creature named Maud, had flown letters from Hogwarts to Egypt and back without a single stop. Some owls were too old to fly, but stayed on out of loyalty, nipping affectionately at children's fingers. Others were sleek and new, trained to dive through storms and avoid magical interference. The post office smelled like ink, parchment, and feathers. Ron once said, "It's louder than the Burrow on Christmas morning." But when a letter needed to reach someone, when it had to reach them, this was where you went. Number 12. Hidden passageways connecting Hogsmeade and Hogwarts. The tunnel behind the humpbacked one-eyed witch wasn't just a secret, it was a legend. Carved into Hogwarts stone centuries ago, it began with a simple tap of a wand and the words Descendium. That's what Fred and George whispered to Harry in their third year, grinning like they were handing him the keys to the entire wizarding world. "Takes you straight to the cellar of Honeydukes," George said. "You'll be swimming in sugar quills before Filch knows you're gone." And Harry used it. Again and again. Slipping past the castle walls, ducking under barrels of fudge flies, and tasting freedom in every forbidden step. But that wasn't the only path. There were more. Whispered about in parchment margins, doodles in old textbooks. Some started in the dungeons, others behind sliding panels in the Ravenclaw Tower. One, according to legend, ran beneath the Black Lake, its walls dripping with magic and age. Fred once claimed to have found a bricked-up entrance behind the mirror on the 4th floor. "Felt a breeze, I swear," he told Lee Jordan, "and it smelled like treacle tart." Most of these passages were forgotten, but not by everyone. Dumbledore, it was said, knew them all, possibly even added one or two of his own. During the dark times, when Voldemort's shadow crept closer to the castle, it was these hidden paths that mattered most. Some say members of the Order used them. Some believe Aberforth Dumbledore smuggled supplies through one near the Hog's Head. "Hogwarts has more doors than you think," Remus Lupin once told Harry. "Some open when you need them, some close forever." Long before any of them, there was Hengist of Woodcroft, a name buried in history but carved into the foundation of Hogsmeade itself. He was said to have dug the first tunnels, not for sweets or mischief, but for safety, a way for witches and wizards to flee in silence when the world turned against them. Centuries later, those same tunnels carried pranks, resistance, and secrets. From laughter to war, stone to stone, the paths endured. Hidden veins between school and sanctuary. Number 13, Honeydukes, paradise for sweet tooths and secret agents. Every student at Hogwarts knew that stepping into Honeydukes was like stepping into a dream. Shelves bursting with colourful sweets, jars of fizzing whizbees buzzing softly, rows of acid pops daring you to try one. But what most of them never realised was that under the sugar-coated surface, Honeydukes held a secret far more thrilling than licorice wands. Beneath the shop, hidden behind crates of cauldron cakes, lay a trap door. It opened to a secret tunnel leading directly to Hogwarts, specifically to the humpbacked witch statue on the 3rd floor. It was Fred and George Weasley who first told Harry about it, and Harry used it in The Prisoner of Azkaban to sneak into Hogsmeade without permission. The shop wasn't just a place for candy, it was a haven for the curious, the brave, and maybe even the rebellious. The owners, Ambrosius and Daisy Flume, had run the store for decades, quiet, cheerful, never raising suspicion. But there were whispers that during the First Wizarding War the Flumes aided the Order of the Phoenix. They supposedly passed secret messages hidden inside peppermint toads and spelled chocolate frogs to leap only into the right hands. "We always did love our sweets," Sirius Black once said with a grin, "but some of us loved the Flumes' loyalty more than their fudge flies." Their shelves also offered strange and sometimes alarming delights: blood-orange lollipops that numbed the tongue, exploding chewing gum that sent out coloured sparks. Ron Weasley once dared Seamus Finnegan to chew 3 at once. The result? A temporary case of blue smoke billowing from Seamus's ears. It wasn't uncommon for sweets to have side effects, some accidental, some perhaps by design. Hermione Granger once remarked, "You'd think the Ministry would inspect that place more often." But she said it with a smirk, not a warning. During the Second Wizarding War, the shop stayed open, officially neutral, unofficially loyal. Some say it was through Honeydukes that early copies of the Quibbler's Resistance issues found their way into Hogwarts. Harry, returning there in his 6th year, couldn't help but feel the weight of the place. Not just the sugar in the air, but the history under the floorboards. Honeydukes was more than a sweet shop. It was a secret passage, a rumour, a shield, wrapped in candy paper. Number 14, Halloween in Hogsmeade, a magical festival. In the narrow cobblestone lanes of Hogsmeade, something shifts as October ends. The whisper of wind through the ancient chimneys seems to carry secrets. The candles in the Three Broomsticks flicker without breeze, and Madame Rosmerta swears the shadows in her mirror lean in closer than they should. This is not the Hogsmeade of the ordinary winter frost or summer bustle. This is the village reborn for Halloween, the one night a year when magic feels denser, when even the portraits blink twice before speaking, and the air hums with anticipation. Every year, without fail, the village transforms on the eve of All Hallows. Glowing pumpkins float mid-air, carved with runes rather than faces, flickering with flames not lit by matches but incantations. They hover over the rooftops, slowly drifting like orange lanterns in a dark sky. The villagers prepare weeks in advance. Zonko's joke shop stocks prank charms that only activate after midnight. Honeydukes creates limited batches of blood-orange fizzing whizbees which, when eaten on Halloween night, allow the consumer to breathe out ghostly bats, not illusions, real, fluttering things that vanish after a minute, as if returning to wherever they came from. The year that stands out to every Hogwarts student who remembers it vividly is 1993, though few speak of it without unease, that Halloween carried a strange weight. It was the year Sirius Black's name was whispered with terror, yet Hogsmeade still opened its arms for the festivities. Even under such tension, the Halloween enchantments went forward. On that night, the main street hosted the traditional Scarecrow March. Each scarecrow had been handcrafted by students under Professor Flitwick's supervision, and each enchanted with its own charm. One in particular, made by Luna Lovegood's mother before her passing, walked with a limp and left behind a trail of floating daisies instead of straw. Villagers remember it still. Magical fireworks, concocted by a then-unknown pair of ginger-haired mischief-makers, lit up the sky in strange shapes: a roaring lion in Gryffindor red, a spinning badger of Hufflepuff yellow, and a winking snake in green that made some Slytherin fourth years gasp. The fireworks were later attributed to Fred and George Weasley, who would go on to perfect their craft into the spectacular displays seen during their reign at Weasley's Wizard Wheezes. But it began here, under the ink-dark sky of Hogsmeade's Halloween, with pops of colour and laughter, while students sipped spiced butterbeer and huddled beneath floating lanterns that whispered old incantations. One cannot speak of Halloween in Hogsmeade without mentioning the Enchanted Market. For one night only, traders from distant corners of the magical world appear. Some arrive on thestral-drawn carts, others by magical barges that moor mysteriously on dry land. These are not the usual Diagon Alley vendors. One year, a veiled woman sold talismans that shimmered with prophecy. "Only wear it if you're ready to hear the truth," she warned, and a third-year Ravenclaw who ignored the advice claimed to have heard her own voice telling secrets in her dreams for weeks. She refused to return to Hogsmeade for the rest of the year. There was also the time in 1995 when Professor Sprout escorted her herbology students to a stall selling rare sentient gourds from Eastern Europe. They blinked, they hissed, and one even muttered in Polish. Sprout was fascinated, but Filch had to be called when a gourd bit Neville Longbottom's sleeve and refused to let go. That same year, Professor Snape reportedly purchased a phial of ink that could only be seen under moonlight. Its purpose remains unknown, but rumours persisted that he used it to write instructions for potions never taught at Hogwarts. A singular spectacle unique to Hogsmeade's Halloween is the arrival of the pumpkin spirits. These are not conjured, but coaxed into being by the villagers. Children craft pumpkin bodies in the days leading up to the event, and then, at dusk, witches and wizards cast the awakened charm in unison. If the magic is pure and the intention joyful, the pumpkins animate. With glowing eyes and soft, warm auras, they drift through the streets like gentle guardians. Once, in 2001, a pumpkin spirit led a lost first year back to the castle gates, humming what was later identified as an old lullaby from the 14th century. Equally unforgettable are the music rituals held behind the Hog's Head. Most of the year, Aberforth Dumbledore discourages attention, but on Halloween he allows something special. Musicians gather with instruments enchanted to play not only melodies but memories. One violin, enchanted by a former Beauxbaton student, played a haunting tune that brought listeners visions of their childhood home, even if they had never seen it with their own eyes. "It's a kind of musical legilimency," said Professor Flitwick, who had once tried to replicate the charm without success. Halloween in Hogsmeade is also the only time of year when the veil tent is pitched in the village square. It appears suddenly without warning and is gone before dawn. Inside, the air grows colder and shadows longer. It's said that those brave enough to enter may catch whispers from the dead, not ghosts, but echoes from the veil itself. A student from Durmstrang fainted after claiming to hear her grandmother recite a lullaby she hadn't heard since infancy. No one knows who brings the tent or who takes it away, but it is treated with reverence and fear alike. In 1987, a student named Evan Rosier vanished for 3 hours during Halloween in Hogsmeade. When he returned, he held a silver coin with ancient markings and could not speak for a week. It was believed he had found one of the fabled ghost markets, said to appear once a century during a confluence of magical forces. He never explained what happened, but the coin remains in the restricted section of the Hogwarts library, guarded by layers of spells and the occasional stern gaze of Madame Pince. Number 15. Winter in Hogsmeade. Beautiful but dangerous. Of all the magical places in the wizarding world, Hogsmeade stands apart in its charm and its danger. While Hogwarts looms majestic above the lake, its little neighbouring village wraps itself in snow like a secret. During winter, when students walk past the wrought iron gates on their rare weekends out, Hogsmeade becomes a place of whispers, heavy cloaks and hidden eyes. The snow is not just snow here, it covers more than rooftops and crooked cobblestone paths. It conceals intentions, tracks and truths. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Harry arrives in Hogsmeade, cloaked not only in a borrowed identity, thanks to Polyjuice Potion, but also in the heaviness of war. It is winter. The village is snow-covered and seemingly silent, but Harry knows enough to feel the danger. He had forgotten the cold, Rowling writes. He had not expected the pain of it. The snow stings not just because of frostbite, but because every flake seems to carry a watchful eye. Hogsmeade is no longer the friendly village of Honeydukes and Zonkos. It is now territory occupied by fear, resistance, and surveillance. When Harry disapparates with Ron and Hermione into the village, cloaked as a red-haired muggle man, they are immediately met not with peace, but with a scream, an unnatural, echoing sound that cuts through the cold like glass. The sound is a trap. A caterwauling charm, the books tell us, a piercing, magical shriek meant to alert Death Eaters to unauthorized entry. It had been placed by Severus Snape himself, now headmaster, and loyal, or seemingly loyal, servant of Voldemort. The charm, activated in the stillness of snow, was not just functional, it was symbolic. In the silence of Hogsmeade's winter, even the slightest misstep was a trumpet call to danger. Aberforth Dumbledore becomes Harry's unexpected saviour. Pulling the trio into the shadows of the Hogshead Inn, he yanks them from view just as Death Eaters storm into the alley. The snow outside melts on their cloaks, revealing how close they'd come to ruin. "You've got a funny way of being inconspicuous," Aberforth growls in the book. Hogsmeade, for all its nostalgic charm, is no longer a safe place, and in winter it never was. The snow muffles voices, disguises movement, covers prints, and makes surveillance both more likely and more needed. It wasn't just during the Second Wizarding War that Hogsmeade became a place of tension. During the Triwizard Tournament, the village was a destination for cheer and cider, but beneath the surface, it was laced with suspicion. Barty Crouch Jr., disguised as Mad-Eye Moody, used Hogsmeade's winter cover to guide events at Hogwarts. When students poured into shops and pubs, it became easier for a false teacher to watch, manipulate, and plan. Who would notice an extra set of eyes when everyone was focused on butterbeer and Bertie Bott's beans? Even in Harry's third year, during The Prisoner of Azkaban, snow becomes a silent accomplice. Harry, having not received his permission slip to visit Hogsmeade, sneaks through the secret passage behind the one-eyed witch statue. Emerging among the snowy barrels behind Honeydukes, he becomes a ghost in his own world. He crept through the snow unnoticed, Rowling tells us. But his invisibility was both literal and metaphorical. Hogsmeade in the snow allowed Harry to blend in, to be unseen. It offered refuge, but at a price he had to deceive. That deception had consequences. Inside the Three Broomsticks, as Harry listens from under his invisibility cloak, he hears the truth about Sirius Black, that his godfather, not his parents' supposed betrayer, had once been believed to cause their deaths. This revelation shifts the story's course forever, and it happened in Hogsmeade. In the warmth of a pub filled with steam and students and mulled mead, danger hovered, cloaked not in black robes but in words. Hogsmeade's geography plays into this duality. The village is nestled at the foot of the mountains, its crooked chimneys always trailing smoke into grey skies. The snow makes the narrow alleys appear even tighter, even more private. It gives a false sense of intimacy. It's why students hold hands there, sneak kisses, behind walls of white. But that same intimacy is dangerous. Secrets pass more easily in silence. Plots are more believable when the world is blanketed in stillness. When the roads are frozen and travel is difficult, there are fewer witnesses and more shadows. The Ministry of Magic, aware of Hogsmeade's unique location as the only all-wizarding village in Britain, took great care in monitoring it during dangerous times. Arthur Weasley once mentioned to Molly that things were heating up near Hogsmeade. What he didn't say, but knew, was that auras often disguised themselves as villagers during winter, particularly around Christmas, when travellers used the snow-covered village as a midpoint between locations. It was a known haven for those on the run. White snow became a white flag for fugitives. Even Voldemort in his youth had ties to Hogsmeade's winter charm. In Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore and Harry visit memories that show a young Tom Riddle frequenting the village. He had questioned shopkeepers, learned of the Gaunt family, and pieced together his identity as the heir of Slytherin. These visits often happened in cold weather, when people were too busy with winter stock and wrapping gifts to notice a quiet teenager asking dangerous questions. The snow became his cover, the village his hunting ground. Later, when Harry and Dumbledore walk through Hogsmeade after one of their trips into memory, they find themselves in a storm. The snow is coming in thick waves. "Strange how the weather always knows," Dumbledore says. "It isn't just metaphor. In the world of magic, weather often reflects emotion, prophecy, and pending doom. Hogsmeade's snow is not just weather, it's an omen." That night, as they return to Hogwarts, the storm intensifies, echoing the chaos to come. Number 16. Madame Scribble's Quill Shop. In the northern corner of Hogsmeade, just behind the crooked chimney of Dogweed and Deathcap, stood a little shop so narrow and unremarkable that most visitors passed it without a second glance. Its sign was barely visible, a curling feather etched into weathered wood, faded with time. Few noticed the name, Scribbulus's Companion, Quills, by Madame Scrivell. The letters were written in an elegant script that seemed to vanish when one wasn't looking directly at them. While tourists swarmed Honeydukes or gaped at the shrieking windows of Zonko's joke shop, a quiet queue of students with neat robes and ink-stained fingers often made their way to this humble corner of the wizarding village. It wasn't the sort of shop that advertised itself. No glittering charms burst from the windows, no enchanted signs waved from the door. Yet to those who knew what to look for, it was a sanctuary of precision. Inside, shelves wrapped the walls from floor to ceiling, packed with boxes of quills arranged not by size or colour, but by subtle properties only the shopkeeper could explain. Madame Scrivell herself was a silent figure with tightly coiled grey hair, always hunched behind the counter, polishing feather shafts with meticulous care. Her hands moved like clockwork, and her spectacles perched so low on her nose they barely served a purpose. Hermione Granger discovered the shop in her 3rd year, after becoming increasingly frustrated with the smudges her usual quills left in the margins of her essays. She had wandered away from the crowd on a snowy Hogsmeade weekend, looking for a place to warm her fingers, when the quiet glow of Scrivell's window caught her eye. She stepped inside and almost instantly felt as though she'd found a hidden vault of magic, not the showy kind taught in classrooms, but the quiet, dependable kind that lived in objects and old craftsmanship. From that year onward, Hermione refused to write her essays with anything else. Her favourite purchase was a slender goose quill, charmed with Grammaticus claritas, an enchantment that gently corrected grammatical structure without altering meaning. It didn't do the work for her, but it nudged her wrist subtly when she began a sentence with a dangling modifier or misplaced a clause. In her 6th year, while preparing her 17-inch essay on Golpalot's 3rd law for advanced potions, she remarked to Ginny, "If this feather had a face, I'd marry it." Ginny had laughed, assuming Hermione was joking, but there was a seriousness in her tone. She never let Ron borrow that particular quill, no matter how much he begged. Though the shop remained unknown to most, the Ravenclaws spoke of it in hushed tones, exchanging tips on the best quill type for different classes. Padma Patil once swore that her peacock feather quill from Madame Scrivell gave her just enough confidence to articulate her argument in Professor Binns' essay on Goblin Rebellions, earning her rare praise from the ghostly professor. Extraordinary articulation, Binns had said drowsily, which, coming from him, was the equivalent of applause. But the most unlikely customer of Madame Scrivell's was Neville Longbottom. Clumsy, anxious Neville, whose essays often came back marked in red ink, and whose cauldron mishaps were almost a weekly event in Professor Snape's dungeon. It was during his 4th year that Professor Sprout, noticing his mounting frustration, quietly suggested he visit the quill shop on his next Hogsmeade weekend. "Tell Madame Scrivell you need something forgiving," she said with a wink. Neville did as she said, nervously approaching the narrow shop one blustery Saturday afternoon. Madame Scrivell looked him over without a word and pulled from beneath the counter a tawny owl-feather quill bound with a silver thread. It came in a dark green box that smelled faintly of rosemary. He didn't know what enchantment it carried, only that when he began his potions essay that night, the words flowed more naturally, the letters forming without blots, and his thoughts, usually so scattered, seemed to line up in tidy rows. That week, Snape returned his parchment with only one cutting remark instead of 5. To Neville, it was a small miracle. Years later, when asked what had turned the tide in his academic life, Neville would grin sheepishly and say, "A really good quill, and maybe some rosemary." It became a quiet joke among his friends, but the truth of it lingered. Objects, especially magical ones crafted with care, had their own subtle power, often shaping lives in ways spells could not. Madame Scrivell understood this. She never boasted of her craft, but her customers became loyal, not out of novelty, but necessity. The magic of the shop wasn't limited to grammar or neatness. There were quills charmed to detect falsehoods, prized by aspiring law wizards. Others slightly warmed the fingers of the writer, perfect for cold examination halls. One rare phoenix feather quill was rumoured to allow a moment's clarity before committing a thought to parchment, useful perhaps for making decisions that could not be undone. These were kept locked behind glass, and only 6th and 7th years were ever permitted to inquire. The subtlety of Madame Scrivell's work extended to the shop's wards. It was said that no one with dishonest intentions could find the store at all. Fred and George once tried to visit for a prank-writing contest they had organised, and were baffled to find no sign of the place. "Like the bloody thing erased itself," Fred muttered. Only when Hermione took them directly did they manage to cross the threshold, and even then Madame Scrivell narrowed her eyes suspiciously at their entrance. Though not officially recognised in Hogwarts supply lists, her shop's reputation spread among the staff as well. Professor McGonagall kept a bundle of her charmed black swan feathers in her drawer for grading Transfiguration essays. "Nothing as precise," she once muttered to a colleague. Madame Pince, despite her prickly disposition, was known to keep Scrivell's ink-drying blotters in the restricted section, trusting their subtle spells to preserve the older tomes. Number 17, The Brawl, when Death Eaters invaded. Of all the places beyond the gates of Hogwarts, Hogsmeade had always shimmered like a cosy mirage of safety. The only all-wizarding village in Britain, it once promised butterbeer warmth, the mischief of Zonko's joke shop, and snowy strolls past Honeydukes. But by the time of the Half-Blood Prince, that charm began to fray. The shadows that once lingered on the edge of the Forbidden Forest had crept into the cobbled streets of Hogsmeade. Voldemort was no longer a whisper. He was rising, and his reach was tightening. This shift was felt nowhere more disturbingly than in the heart of the village. For in one chilling moment, even the comfort of a butterbeer at the Three Broomsticks turned into a trap. It began not with an explosion, but with something quieter, more sinister. Madame Rosmerta, who for years had watched generations of students grow up while sipping drinks by her hearth, was no longer herself. She moved with the same grace, wore the same welcoming smile, but beneath it pulsed a forced obedience. As it was later revealed, she had fallen under the imperious curse, controlled like a puppet by those loyal to the Dark Lord. She became a conduit of darkness within a place that had always stood for light. She had passed on information, facilitated sabotage, and delivered a poisoned bottle of mead intended for Dumbledore himself. The betrayal was quiet, but absolute. The war was no longer at the gates. It had slipped in through the back door and taken a seat at the bar. One evening in late winter, a bitter cold whipped through the village. Snow clung to the windows, and the scent of wood smoke floated between shops. Students, wrapped in scarves and thick cloaks, moved in groups. They were not just seeking sweets or pranks now, but a brief escape from the fear that had begun to seep into every hallway of Hogwarts. But this illusion of escape would soon shatter. Outside the Three Broomsticks, a confrontation erupted, unexpected, violent, and dangerous. The attack was sudden. 2 older students, Ernie Macmillan and Katie Bell, were shoved aside as a tall, hooded figure stormed through the snow. The atmosphere cracked with tension. The figure wasn't a Death Eater in full regalia. He wore simple robes tattered from travel, but his wand moved with a cruel precision. This was no random drifter. Dean Thomas, who had been chatting with Seamus Finnegan near the door, reacted first. He drew his wand in defence, shouting for others to get inside. But before anyone could take proper cover, a second figure appeared from behind the alleyway near Gludrags. It became clear this was a coordinated effort. Hogsmeade was being tested. These attackers were not officially branded Death Eaters. They bore no dark marks on their arms, but their loyalty was unquestionable. They were affiliates, desperate for approval from their master. And they were targeting students. The Three Broomsticks exploded into motion, chairs overturned as students scrambled. Madame Rosmerta, still under the imperious curse, stood behind the bar, expressionless. It would later be noted that she made no move to help nor to warn. Her eyes followed the attackers with a blank, eerie stillness. She knew what was coming, but could not resist the compulsion to obey. Outside, the snow churned with movement. Ginny Weasley, though only in her 5th year, stepped forward with alarming courage. She cast a blasting curse that missed the attacker's torso by inches. Her spell ignited a shop sign, sending wooden shards scattering across the street. Chaos bloomed, and the once picturesque village became a battleground. One of the attackers retaliated with a Cruciatus curse. It missed Neville Longbottom, but struck a 6th-year Hufflepuff, who crumpled in agony. The scream cut through the winter air like a knife. It was the sound of innocence breaking. This was no classroom duel, it was war. Harry Potter himself had not been present. He was in detention with Snape at the time, but word reached the castle within the hour. He would later say, "It was the first time I realized Hogsmeade was no longer ours." The safety perimeter that Hogwarts students had once believed in had collapsed. Voldemort was not only attacking high-profile targets, he was instilling fear through unpredictability. The aftermath was sobering. The Ministry, already under strain, sent 2 Aurors to investigate. Their report was brief. Hogsmeade remains compromised. Recommend limited access and continued surveillance. But the truth was more disturbing than any parchment could convey. This attack had not been about capturing anyone or even inflicting mass casualties. It had been a message. The residents of Hogsmeade, once content to mind their shops and serve the students, began to change. Madame Puddifoot closed her tea room indefinitely, citing emotional exhaustion. The owners of Zonko's, once the hub of laughter, boarded up their shop and vanished overnight. Some said they fled abroad. Others believed they were silenced for what they had seen. Aberforth Dumbledore, the reclusive barman of the Hog's Head, became more visibly present in the following weeks. His eyes, always sharp, now darted to every corner. He was one of the few who had seen this all before. "It's happening again," he muttered to himself one evening, as reported by a 5th-year Ravenclaw. "Only this time they're not hiding in forests, they're standing in doorways." The trust between villagers and students began to erode. Filch, paranoid and emboldened, demanded to escort every group down to Hogsmeade personally. Professor McGonagall argued against it, but the compromise was grim: limited Hogsmeade visits, restricted zones, and full wand inspections. The students were beginning to feel like prisoners even outside of their castle. What made this particular episode so haunting was the ambiguity. The attackers were never officially named, no arrests were made, no fingerprints taken. Some suspected it was a test orchestrated by Voldemort himself. Others whispered it had been Draco Malfoy's doing, a dry run for what he would later execute at the Astronomy Tower. But what could be proven? Even the sky seemed darker after that day. In the weeks following, Katie Bell, who had survived the cursed necklace earlier that year, became more withdrawn. Though she had not been hit by a spell during the fight, her hands trembled whenever she walked past the alley where it had all begun. Her friend Leanne said quietly, "Hogsmeade used to mean sugar quills. Now it just means fear." The fight marked a turning point. It was no longer just rumours from the Daily Prophet or hushed talks in the common rooms. The war had walked right up to their butterbeer mugs and overturned them. "The world is changing even here," said Professor Flitwick at a staff meeting shortly after. He had been seen casting protective enchantments over the paths leading into the village. Students noticed new charms glimmering faintly over windows, and some doorways bore ancient runes no one could translate. Hogsmeade was arming itself quietly. It's important to remember that Madame Rosmerta's possession was not an isolated act. She had been imperioused by Draco Malfoy, who used her to smuggle in the cursed necklace and later the poisoned mead. Her role in the greater plan to kill Dumbledore made the previous attack outside the Three Broomsticks feel like a small thread in a web that had been spinning in silence for months. "I had no choice," she would say afterward, tears in her eyes, shaking. "I remember none of it." This detail chilled even the most hardened professors. If someone as embedded and respected in the village as Rosmerta could be turned, silently, unknowingly, who else could be? Was the man at Scrivenshafts really scribbling notes, or was he reporting movements? Was the woman at Honeydukes smiling because she cared, or because she was told to watch? The fear was insidious, the kind that wrapped around you at night and made you doubt even your own senses. Later, when Harry and Dumbledore would take that final trip to the cave, the village had taken on a kind of ghostly quiet. It was no longer bustling with laughter or mischief. It was subdued, tense, every shadow a potential danger. Even the owls seemed to fly more cautiously. This shift in Hogsmeade was never fully reversed. Though the Battle of Hogwarts would come and Voldemort would fall, the memory of what had happened in that village lingered. For those who lived through it, it stood as a reminder nowhere was untouchable. Not even the village where students once giggled over love potions and sherbet balls. Perhaps the most disturbing reality was how quickly it all changed. One term, one winter, a few quiet curses, a moment of violence, and the heart of wizarding Britain shifted on its axis. They say Hogsmeade was where wizards went to feel young again, but that year it became the place where children aged overnight. Number 18, the magical laundry, myth or reality. Every year, as the first Hogsmeade weekend approached, students buzzed not only with excitement about sweets from Honeydukes or butterbeer at the Three Broomsticks, but also with whispered speculation about the mysterious magical laundromat rumoured to exist somewhere in the village. First-year Gryffindor Evangeline Ross had heard the tale before even stepping off the Hogwarts Express. Her older brother, Clarence, had once returned from a Hogsmeade trip with a set of robes that smelled faintly of lavender and somehow never wrinkled again, no matter how carelessly he stuffed them into his trunk. He never confirmed the laundromat story directly, but whenever she asked, he'd just grin and say, "Make sure your socks are dirty enough." According to circulating lore, the entrance to the laundromat wasn't marked by any sign or shop window. It didn't appear on any known map, magical or otherwise. The only known condition for discovering it, and this was repeated in hushed tones across all four houses, was that the seeker must unknowingly carry at least one truly dirty sock in their satchel or pocket. Not just dusty or slightly worn, but deeply soiled. Those who wandered the alleys of Hogsmeade with pristine laundry were said to pass right by it without even noticing a door. The most cited example among students came from a Ravenclaw fifth year named Penelope Greaves. She had supposedly vanished for 2 hours during a Hogsmeade trip in 1994 and returned with every single piece of her wardrobe shimmering with magical freshness. Her socks, in particular, were a point of fascination. They always came out of the laundry in matching pairs, even when she had only turned in one. When questioned by her friends, she simply shrugged and said, "The laundromat knows." This cryptic answer only deepened the intrigue. More evidence came from a disorganized Hufflepuff named Lionel Trigg, who was notorious for losing his buttons. Nearly every school day, he would walk into the Great Hall with at least one dangling or missing entirely. But one weekend in his 6th year, he reappeared on Monday with every button sewn perfectly, each with a tiny enchanted emblem of his initials in silver thread. When Professor Sprout complimented his sudden neatness, Lionel turned pink and muttered, "It wasn't me, it was the place." The strongest testimony, however, came not from a student, but from a house elf named Tigglenob, who had once assisted in the Hogwarts kitchens. It was said that he had ventured into Hogsmeade one weekend to deliver a basket of tea towels and vanished for almost a month. When he returned, the other elves claimed he had been humming softly to himself, his eyes glazed in a kind of trance. When prodded, he would only repeat, "Best time I ever had, sir. Buttons danced, socks sang songs, magic steam, warm like hugs." What made this tale even more strange was that none of the Hogwarts professors ever confirmed the laundromat's existence, nor did they deny it. Professor Flitwick once chuckled during a charms lesson when a student accidentally enchanted her robe to levitate. "You'll need more practice," he said, "unless you've found the secret laundromat in Hogsmeade, now that one knows its charms." The room fell silent, the implication hanging in the air like a spell not yet cast. The supposed magic of the laundromat extended beyond mere cleanliness. A third-year Slytherin named Rhea Thornfield once claimed her entire cloak had been rewoven while she waited. The hem, frayed from months of trailing over castle stones, had been repaired with threads that shimmered slightly in moonlight. She didn't even notice the change until her owl refused to perch on her shoulder, distracted by the cloak's new enchantment. "It's alive," Rhea whispered once, before locking it away in her wardrobe. It is curious to note that no two accounts of the laundromat described the same location. Some swore it stood behind Dervish and Bangis, accessible only through a twisted alleyway that no longer existed the following week. Others said the entrance was under a trapdoor in the Hogshead Inn, not the main bar, but through a hallway door that creaked open only when approached with muddy shoes. One particularly outlandish claim came from an adventurous pair of Gryffindor twins who insisted they discovered it inside a wardrobe discarded behind Zonko's joke shop. When they opened it, they didn't step into a closet, but into a room filled with swirling mists and the scent of fresh thyme. Descriptions of the laundromat's interior were equally inconsistent. Some students recalled gleaming copper tubs that filled themselves with water, heated by dragon's breath. Others swore they saw rows of wooden cabinets labelled with phrases like unstainable or wrinkle-proof. One popular rumour suggested that house elf spirits, not ghosts, but shimmering projections of elves who had passed on, worked inside, cheerfully mending, scrubbing, and enchanting every garment with joyful dedication. The magic of the laundromat appeared to operate on a currency beyond galleons, sickles, or nuts. No one reported paying in gold. Instead, visitors spoke of having to give something personal. A song sung aloud, a secret whispered into the steam, a story written on a paper tag. A Gryffindor girl once confessed that she had to recount the tale of her worst nightmare to a silent mirror in order to get her uniform back. Another student claimed he had to perform a cartwheel while wearing only one sock. The transactions, though bizarre, were always met with results. There was a period between 1995 and 1997 when no one claimed to find the laundromat at all. Many believed the chaos of the Second Wizarding War had caused it to disappear, or perhaps retreat deeper into magical concealment. Students still wandered the village with dirty socks in hopes of finding it, but the alleys of Hogsmeade yielded nothing but snow, silence, and the occasional hissing cat. It wasn't until the war ended and calm returned to the castle that sightings resumed. When Dennis Creevey returned to Hogwarts in 1998 to finish his education after the war, he became one of the last known students to encounter the laundromat. His younger brother Colin had died during the Battle of Hogwarts, and Dennis carried with him a cloak that had once belonged to Colin. On his first visit to Hogsmeade, Dennis walked aimlessly with Colin's unwashed cloak in his bag. He claimed that near the Shrieking Shack, a gust of wind blew open a wooden gate. Inside, he found a warm, misty room with walls that glowed softly. The cloak was taken Swadhibi not by hands, but by invisible magic, and when it returned, it bore a stitched constellation on the inside hem. "I think it's the stars over our house," Dennis once told Luna Lovegood, his voice shaking. the ones we used to name. The few attempts to formally investigate the laundromat, including efforts by the Department of Magical Transportation and the Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes, led nowhere. The Ministry sent 2 Aurors to Hogsmeade in 2001 carrying bundles of laundry, but they returned with only cleaner clothes and no recollection of how they were washed. "It's as if the village itself protects the secret," one of them muttered, baffled. Magical traces detected by the Department of Mysteries hinted at spatial anomalies near Madame Puddifoot's tea shop, but no entry point was ever found. Even today, the legend lives on. Every new generation of Hogwarts students learns about the laundromat from older peers, and many plan their Hogsmeade visits with hope. The enchantment lies not just in the cleanliness of the clothes, but in the sense that the laundromat understands its visitors. A first year who arrives homesick might find a jumper returned with the scent of their mother's perfume. A nervous 7th year might receive back their tie, infused with a mild, calming charm. The magic is subtle, but deeply personal. There are rare occasions when enchanted clothing from the laundromat reacts in public. One instance occurred during the 2012 Yule Ball held for 7th years and alumni. A Slytherin named Maxima Holling wore a gown that shimmered with soft silver waves. Not uncommon. But each time she was complimented, the dress added a single, sparkling starburst along the hem. By the end of the evening, it looked like the night sky. When asked about it, Maxima simply smiled and whispered, "It's loyal laundry." Though no written record of the laundromat exists in official Hogwarts documents, a curious passage in the Tales of Beedle the Bard, annotated by Albus Dumbledore, hints at a room of many steams where kindness was its key. Whether this was metaphorical or not remains unclear. But to those who have visited the laundromat, it is more than a myth. It is a small, enchanted fragment of the wizarding world, a space of quiet restoration in a life often overwhelmed by chaos. Some argue the laundromat is not a place at all, but a living spell, a benevolent pocket of enchanted reality that drifts through Hogsmeade's fabric like a phantom carriage. It chooses who may enter and when. It exists not for convenience, but for moments of quiet help, little enchantments that restore more than clothes. No one has ever found it twice in the same spot. As of this writing, the only confirmed artifact suspected to originate from the laundromat is a tie owned by Professor Neville Longbottom. When asked why it never wrinkles despite his habit of leaving it crumpled on his desk, he winked and said, "Let's just say I once had a very enlightening walk through Hogsmeade after gardening." Whether legend or reality, the magical laundromat of Hogsmeade remains one of the most charming and persistent mysteries in the wizarding world. It requires no advertising, no fame, no explanation. It endures through whispers and wonder, a spell sewn into the very fabric of the village itself. Number 19. Underground Meetings of Dumbledore's Army. There is a corner in the wizarding world that holds more secrets than it lets on. Not the Forbidden Forest nor the dungeons beneath Hogwarts, but the quiet village just beyond the gates, Hogsmeade. Charming, snow-capped, bustling during Hogsmeade weekends. Yes. But during the darkest days of Dolores Umbridge's tyrannical grip on Hogwarts, the village transformed into something more. It became a sanctuary, a meeting ground, and a battlefield of whispers and wands. When Umbridge tightened her grip on Hogwarts, silencing students and staff alike, magic didn't fade, it simply retreated, waiting for a place to breathe. Hogsmeade, untouched by her direct control, became that place. It was the only remaining ground where students could exhale. Behind the steamy windows of the Three Broomsticks and within the hidden alleys near Honeydukes, rebellion stirred. Fred and George Weasley, always alert to the scent of mischief, were among the first to realize the potential of Hogsmeade. While their public stunts entertained the school, their true investments lay in whispers, traded in Rosmerta's back room. They carried notes concealed within chocolate frog boxes and used enchanted extendable ears to monitor shifts in Umbridge's patrols. Every journey to Hogsmeade wasn't just a break, it was reconnaissance. The earliest meetings of Dumbledore's army, what was initially known simply as the group, had been held in the Room of Requirement. But the increasing presence of the inquisitorial squad forced a shift. Hogsmeade, accessible only to third years and older on scheduled weekends, became the new epicenter. There, among barrels of butterbeer and fading posters of Celestina Warbeck, students found each other again, free for a few hours to speak, to plan, and to learn. One such afternoon, beneath the hum of chatter and the clatter of mugs in the Three Broomsticks, Harry Potter, Hermione Granger, and Ron Weasley huddled with Ernie Macmillan, Luna Lovegood, and Cho Chang at a corner table. Though Madame Rosmerta floated about in her usual dazzling charm, she gave the group their privacy, perhaps guessing that something more than idle gossip simmered between them. There were parchments with jotted wand movements, small enchanted coins, Hermione's clever invention, and careful maps of castle corridors. The DA was evolving. The alleys behind Honeydukes, usually forgotten under piles of enchanted snow and leftover packaging, turned into makeshift training yards. In one such alley, shielded by a disillusionment charm cast by Susan Bones, Neville Longbottom practiced defensive spells. He'd grown stronger, bolder, since the first few shaky attempts in the Room of Requirement. He was a bit behind the others to start with, Harry once thought, but now he was improving fast. In Hogsmeade, he began to shine. Even Zachariah Smith, once reluctant and critical, began to attend these informal sessions. The freedom of being away from Umbridge's rule, outside the reach of her cruel quill and sharper smile, softened his cynicism. In the shadows of Hogsmeade, under the glow of floating lanterns from the pub windows, unity began to replace doubt. Students from different houses crossed old rivalries. The DA became less about Harry's leadership and more about collective survival. Hermione's enchanted galleons hummed faintly in each pocket, signalling changes in meeting times and locations. Though the Room of Requirement remained the heart of their training, Hogsmeade held their soul. It was where ideas blossomed and resolve hardened. It was where they laughed again. Laughter, in Umbridge's Hogwarts, was itself an act of rebellion. It was during one such meeting in the upstairs lounge of the Three Broomsticks that they learned about Marietta Edgecombe's hesitance. Cho had brought her once, believing she could be trusted, but the subtle glances, the way she held her untouched butterbeer, betrayed her. Hermione, never one to underestimate silence, noticed. This meeting ended early. Plans had to change. Secrets were no longer whispers. They had weight, and they needed walls thicker than wood and trust thicker than blood. As the days passed and Umbridge's reign intensified, complete with her ban on student groups and aggressive censorship, Dumbledore's army became truly underground. In the literal sense even, one of the most well-hidden meetings took place in the tunnel beneath Honeydukes. Fred and George, long familiar with every creak and trick stair, helped reinforce the entrance with illusion spells. It was cold, dark, and smelled faintly of sugar dust, but it was safe. Ginny Weasley often took the lead during those Hogsmeade gatherings. "I've got 6 older brothers," she would say, fire in her voice. "I can handle a secret." She had become a fearsome spellcaster, her bat-bogey hex, a legend even among the boys. In one impromptu duel behind Zonko's, she disarmed Seamus Finnegan with such force that he crashed into a crate of dung bombs. The laughter echoed louder than the explosion. It wasn't just training, it was life reclaimed. Once, when news broke that Umbridge had discovered a list of student names, panic swept through the DA. But it wasn't fear for themselves, it was fear that their meetings in Hogsmeade might end. Harry recalled Sirius's words, "The world isn't split into good people and Death Eaters." In Hogsmeade, they learned to live that truth. Students disagreed, argued, but always returned to their cause. Terry Boot, ever the keen observer, began sketching out magical surveillance countermeasures. He created a charmed mirror, inspired by the two-way mirror Harry had from Sirius, which allowed groups in Hogsmeade and Hogwarts to signal each other without owlpost. Luna suggested embedding the mirror into a discarded bag of Bertie Bott's beans, just to make it more unexpected. Quirk met function. Colin Creevey, camera ever present, documented spells, not for the sake of history, but as a study aid. The DA had grown into a network of skill, creativity, and magic. The photographs, charmed to move in real time, became part of their underground library. A single book, charmed by Hermione to appear blank unless opened with the correct wand movement, was hidden in the back of the Shrieking Shack. Yes, the Shrieking Shack. Long believed to be the most haunted building in Britain, it had become the DA's emergency vault. Inside, they kept extra wands stolen from Filch's confiscation cabinet and protective gear, including self-inflating cushions for fall training. No ghosts ever interrupted them, though on stormy nights the wind made them believe otherwise. Lee Jordan coordinated messages between older students and younger members who couldn't yet go to Hogsmeade. Using the Marauder's map, passed to him temporarily by Harry, he identified safe routes and shift changes in Filch's patrols. His coordination was crucial. In one particular incident, he helped Dennis Creevey escape a suspicious prefect by leading him into the cellar of the Hog's Head through a secret door hidden behind barrels of fire whiskey. The Hog's Head itself, dirty, dusty, and often empty, was another meeting place, especially when weather made the alleys unsafe. Aberforth Dumbledore, ever the reluctant ally, allowed the students inside, grumbling about young fools with no sense of secrecy, but never turning them away. He swept their tracks after they left, cleared their mugs, and once even offered an old invisibility cloak to help them back through the tunnel. There were losses, too. When Dobby brought word of Umbridge's detentions becoming crueler, "Blood quills are not regulation," he whispered with wide eyes. Some members stepped back, others doubled down. Lavender Brown took up the job of writing down every charm and countercurse they learned, storing them in coded parchment hidden in her divination textbook. And it was in Hogsmeade, not Hogwarts, that the DA made one of its most daring decisions. After hearing that a new decree banned all unauthorized trips to the village, they voted to continue anyway, using the passageways known only to a few. A vote was held in a snowy alley, hidden from view by George's new invention, a powder that created temporary blizzards. Every hand raised. As winter melted into spring and rumours of Voldemort's return grew louder outside the castle walls, the DA's meetings in Hogsmeade took on a sharper tone. This was no longer schoolwork or resistance against a petty tyrant. This was war preparation. Parvati Patil practiced hexes that left scorch marks on walls. Dean Thomas, skilled with a wand and a pencil, began designing escape plans, some of which would be used the following year during Snape's regime. The DA's last Hogsmeade meeting before its exposure happened on a warm April afternoon. The sun lit the snowmelt into rivers along the cobbled roads, and the Shrieking Shack stood quiet in the distance. Inside the Three Broomsticks, under the clamour of a Saturday crowd, Harry thanked each member. Not in speeches, he never liked those, but in quiet nods, small smiles, and that rare look of peace he wore only when he wasn't carrying the world. In later years, when tales of Dumbledore's army were told, often with embellishments and nostalgic warmth, few remembered how important Hogsmeade had been. But those who sat in that pub, or practiced behind Honeydukes, or passed notes in the tunnels, knew the truth. "We're not learning how to pass our wells," Hermione had said once. "We're learning to survive." And survive they did, because of Hogsmeade, because a village, no matter how small, can hold the weight of 1,000 dreams when filled with people brave enough to carry them. Number 20. Enchanted Lanterns that read Emotions. The narrow streets of Hogsmeade have always seemed too aware for a simple wizarding village. Cobblestone paths that echo louder than expected under one's footsteps, shadows that linger a second longer than they should, and windows that seem to twitch closed when watched. Yet nothing embodies this eerie sentience more than the lanterns. Ancient, wrought-iron street lamps that line the village like silent sentinels. Most wizards believe them to be decorative or enchanted, only to resist snow, but a closer look reveals a far older magic humming beneath their softly glowing glass. Each lantern, roughly 7 feet tall and topped with a warm, golden orb of light, carries a charm so obscure that it's barely mentioned in modern textbooks. The enchantment, according to fragments found in an old volume from the restricted section of the Hogwarts library, is known as lumos sententia. Developed during the 17th century by a witch named Amara Trenshaw, once a resident of Hogsmeade, the charm gives light the ability to respond to human emotion. It was originally intended for safety, allowing solitary travellers to recognize danger by the behavior of the nearest lantern. Yet over centuries, as dark times descended upon the wizarding world, the spell's purpose shifted. It became a tool not only of defense but of judgment. It was first recorded reacting during the Great Blizzard of 1881, a storm so intense that even the fire in Madame Puddifoot's tea house flickered and failed. Yet the lanterns, untouched by ice or wind, continued to burn. Residents noticed something stranger. When young Edric Mulby tried to break into Honeydukes for a dare, the lamp above the shop dimmed to a deep, rust-coloured glow. He'd barely touched the lock before the lantern began to hiss with magical heat, melting a ring of snow around his feet. Mulby ran, leaving a trail of scorched footprints, and the lamp returned to its amber serenity. Rumours swirled, but none could prove anything, only that the lamps burned on, always watching. Hogwarts students, curious as ever, began testing the theory. One particularly brave Gryffindor, Fiona Bell, stood under a lantern after purposefully recalling her worst fear, the day her brother was taken by Dementors. According to her friend Abigail, the light above her started to flicker erratically, as if caught between panic and mourning. Fiona's hand trembled as the flickering intensified, then abruptly ceased when she took a calming breath. It was like the lamp was breathing with her, Abigail would later write in a letter that ended up in the archives of the Daily Prophet. Yet the most dramatic behaviour of the Hogsmeade lanterns occurred during the Second Wizarding War. When Death Eaters began frequenting the village in 1997, the lamps changed completely. Gone was the cosy golden glow. Instead, streets bathed in dim, reddish light, especially near the Shrieking Shack and the path toward the Three Broomsticks. On some nights, the lamps seemed to shiver. They would flicker not from wind, but as if resisting the very presence of certain individuals. Madame Rosmerta once closed the pub early because the lamps outside her establishment had begun to throb with such an intense crimson light that she feared attracting attention from nearby Muggle-sympathetic villagers. In her own words, preserved in a confidential letter to Aberforth Dumbledore, she wrote, "These lights know too much, I think. They're more than wards. They're warnings. They scream in silence, and I've learned to listen." One chilling account came from Seamus Finnegan, who visited Hogsmeade shortly before the Battle of Hogwarts. Walking alone after curfew, he noticed that the lanterns near the Owl Post Office began to dim as he passed. At first, he assumed a simple malfunction. But when he turned a corner and nearly stumbled into two cloaked figures whispering in hushed, conspiratorial tones, the realization dawned. The lamps weren't broken. They were reacting. He ducked behind a stack of crates and waited until the figures disappeared. Later, he would confide in Dean Thomas, saying, "It's like they were warning me. I don't know how, but they knew something was wrong. There's an old superstition in the village that you should never look directly into a lantern's flame when you're hiding something. A Hufflepuff named Clara Pritchard once tried it." Rumours claimed she had been helping an underground group smuggle protective charms to Muggle-born families during the height of the registry crisis. She stood under the lantern by Zonko's with her satchel full of hidden trinkets. Witnesses say the light began to flicker softly, then steadied into a vibrant white glow, something never seen before. Clara was never questioned, but the rumour passed from student to student. The lanterns knew she was good. The Death Eaters, it seemed, were equally unsettled by the lanterns. According to a journal recovered from Thorfinn Rawls' possessions after the war, he once tried extinguishing a lamp with a blasting curse. Not only did the spell rebound, but the light intensified until he was forced to cover his eyes. He noted, "The blasted thing knows. It sees into your bones." He never walked the streets of Hogsmeade alone again. Another curious episode involved Argus Filch, who once visited Hogsmeade to purchase anti-cheating quills at Scrivenshafts. Students laughed behind his back, but an odd thing happened. as he passed under the lanterns near the Hog's Head. The lights sputtered violently, something they rarely did in the daytime. It's unclear whether the magic disliked Filch's bitterness or feared something else. Aberforth later remarked to a fourth-year Ravenclaw that those lights don't care if you've got a wand. They care if you've got something to hide. In one of the lesser-known instances, Luna Lovegood claimed the lanterns responded best to honesty. She described how, on a bitterly cold evening, she stood under the lantern outside Dervish and Bangis and tried to clear her mind of suspicion and fear. The flame, she said, shifted to a soft, silvery hue, unlike its usual amber. No one else saw this, but considering Luna's uncanny connection with the unseen, from Nargles to Raxperts, it seems plausible the lamps responded to something rare and pure. Not all responses were defensive. During a Yule celebration in Hogsmeade, while carols played and students clinked butterbeer mugs, the lamps danced. The glow above each gathering brightened slightly, rhythmically pulsing with the cheer of the crowd. It was as if the entire village exhaled at once. Even Professor McGonagall was seen watching the lights with quiet reverence, her lips pursed as though holding in something deeper than admiration. Perhaps memory. A former ministry worker, Eleanor Twigg, once tried documenting the behavior of Hogsmeade's lanterns during varying emotional states. Her experiments, which involved actors feigning rage, sorrow, and laughter beneath the lamps, resulted in inconsistent outcomes. The lanterns seemed to ignore falsehood, only genuine emotion affected them. When one participant broke into real tears, thinking of a deceased mother, the lamp above turned a gentle blue, as though soothing her from above. Twiggy's findings were dismissed by the Department of Magical Transportation, but she later published her work in a fringe journal titled The Wandering Flame. Some villagers whisper that the lanterns are sentient, not enchanted objects, but enchanted beings, that in their iron and glass slumbers a spirit older than the village itself, a ghost of fire perhaps, or a fragment of elemental magic bound long ago when wizards still spoke to the earth. Whether superstition or not, Hogsmeade has never been robbed under their glow. No cursed object has been openly traded near them, and no dark wizard has walked unobserved on those paths. Not truly. The phrase, "test his soul under the flame," became a common saying during the war, passed between Hogwarts students and Resistance members alike. It meant watching how someone behaved under one of Hogsmeade's lanterns. If they hesitated, if the glow dulled, if a flicker betrayed a buried malice, it was enough to warrant suspicion. It wasn't proof, but in a world where trust was dangerous, it was guidance. In 1998, just days before the final battle, a group of seventh years led by Neville Longbottom ventured to Hogsmeade for supplies. They approached under the cover of fog, the village seemingly deserted. Yet as they crossed into the main road, the lamps above their heads sparked alive, each one lighting in succession with a crisp, warm blaze. The fog parted slowly, revealing a path of pure light. It was like the village welcomed them, Ginny Weasley would later say, like it knew they had come not in fear, but in hope. The lanterns of Hogsmeade have never been duplicated. Similar charms failed to yield the same results in Diagon Alley, and the Ministry eventually halted attempts to replicate them after 3 magical fires erupted during testing. The magic, it seems, is uniquely bound to the land and history of the village. Some suspect the Shrieking Shack, with its volatile enchantments, anchors part of the power. Others believe the original builder of the lanterns, perhaps Amara Trenshaw herself, left something of her spirit in every light. After the war, many visitors to Hogsmeade stopped walking blindly under the lanterns. Some would pause, glance up, and take a breath, as though seeking quiet permission. The lamps never spoke, never moved, never beckoned, but they watched. They always watched. And to this day, on nights when a stranger enters the village with a bitter heart or dangerous thoughts, the lamps react, subtly, steadily. A flicker here, a darkening there. The watchers above do not forget. Number 21, Magical Bees and Hogsmeade. Honey, Nestled behind a thicket of whispering pine trees just beyond the gentle slope that shadows the western edge of Hogsmeade, there lies a meadow that most visitors overlook. It is not marked on any map sold at Zonko's, nor is it mentioned in Hogwarts. A history. And yet those who've taken the time to wander beyond the beaten paths of the village may have noticed a peculiar hum in the air, an ambient melody, soft and constant, like the ringing of glass chimes caught in the breeze. This sound, curiously musical and undeniably magical, is not the wind. It is the wing-beat of the legendary Hogsmeade bees. The beekeeping operation was originally established in 1963 by two retired Hogwarts professors, Professor Dilys Derwent, former head of the hospital wing, and her old colleague, Professor Orlan Trewin, a herbology expert of reclusive nature and fascinating beard. After decades of service, both sought a quieter existence and found it in a shared dream, a honey farm infused with magic and nature. Using spells known only to a few, they bred a unique species of bees now known among magical apiarists as Apis sonorus, or the singing bees. These bees were not ordinary creatures. Each had transparent wings laced with faint golden runes, and their bodies shimmered subtly in sunlight with a spectral glow. But their true wonder was in their hum, a harmonic tone in E major that changed as they moved, creating shifting chords in the air like a living orchestra. Herbologists believed this tonal vibration enhanced the properties of the flowers they pollinated. Potioneers, on the other hand, claimed the tone infused the honey with elevated magical conductivity, making it an ideal stabilizer for certain complex brews. Derwent and Trewin's meadow, which came to be known as the Harmonic Hollow, thrived under protective enchantments, including a perimeter of magically bred hawthorn trees that discouraged trespassers. The bees lived in polished oak hives shaped like miniature bell towers, each emitting a low, melodic hum even at night. Their nectar came exclusively from enchanted blooms, whisper thistle, gold-spun clover, and even some rare variants of lunar bloom, all cultivated in beds hand-tended by the former professors. Every fortnight, the honey would be harvested in a slow, reverent process. Derwent would chant an ancient calming spell, while Trewin gently collected the honeycombs with gloves enchanted to resist stings. The golden liquid would be filtered through a mesh of unicorn hair, then decanted into curved, violet-tinted bottles. A single drop could sweeten tea for a week, and a teaspoon could treat minor, hex-related burns. It was this honey that quickly became sought after by two of Hogsmeade's most iconic establishments, the Three Broomsticks and Honeydukes. Madame Rosmerta, ever the savvy businesswoman, struck a quiet deal with the beekeepers. She added a thin swirl of the honey to her signature mulled mead, giving it a taste both warming and otherworldly. Customers began to murmur of Rosmerta's singing brew, claiming it helped clear their minds or even brought vivid dreams. Ambrosius Flume, proprietor of Honeydukes, incorporated the honey into his spindle fizz lollies, hard sweets that fizzed and chimed on the tongue. Flume once confided in a younger customer, "There's magic in that sweetness, laddie, not the kind you cast, but the kind you remember." Indeed, a single taste could evoke nostalgia so intense that some customers were moved to tears. The popularity of the honeyed products grew so rapidly that Derwent and Trewin had to enchant the bees to limit their honey production, lest the hives exhaust themselves. It is believed that they used a variation of the tempus suspendere charm to slow hive metabolism during off-seasons. It wasn't long before word of the bees' magic spread beyond Hogsmeade. A few enterprising individuals attempted to locate the hollow and claim a hive for themselves. However, the bees were fiercely loyal. When threatened, they would rise in coordinated formation, buzzing so loudly that the trees seemed to tremble. Their bodies would emit sparks, and together they would trace in the air a glowing shape, protego. It was not merely for show. In October of 1981, shortly after the fall of Voldemort, a third-year Hogwarts student named Cecil Thimbletrout decided to steal a jar of the honey as a dare. With two friends egging him on, he slipped away from the school grounds during a Hogsmeade visit, navigated the slope behind the village, and crept into the meadow. The hum of the bees grew louder as he approached. He found a hive, pried it open clumsily, and snatched a jar without thinking. The bees reacted instantly. Within seconds, they swarmed overhead and formed a pulsating arc, glowing with soft blue light. When Cecil turned to flee, a bolt of magical static struck his back, not enough to injure, but certainly enough to knock him into a patch of nettles. His hair stood on end for 7 days, unaffected by water, charms, or gravity. Professor McGonagall was not amused. She assigned him 3 weeks of detention with Hagrid, who repeatedly warned him never to cross magical creatures. Cecil never returned to the Hollow again. What made these bees so intelligent was a mystery even to Derwent and Trewin. Some believed their behavior was guided by the tonal magic in their wings. Others whispered that the bees were connected to an ancient forest spirit once bound to the land. Trewin, in a rare interview published in the Daily Prophet, stated, "Our bees sing because they must, and we listen because we are guests here, not masters." Over the years, the Hollow faded from public knowledge, especially after Derwent's passing in 1987. Trewin, grief-stricken and aging, allowed the meadow to go fallow. He left jars of honey at the foot of Derwent's gravestone every Sunday, until he, too, passed in 1992. Rumour has it, the bees built a hive at the grave's base and guarded it for decades, humming a continuous lullaby in E minor. Some say the bees are still there, though fewer in number. Once a year, on the spring equinox, their song becomes audible across the entire village of Hogsmeade, just for a few minutes. The sound causes all clocks in the area to stop for exactly 12 seconds. A phenomenon noted by Hermione Granger during her 5th year, though she could never explain it logically. "It's as though time listens when they sing," she once said. The honey itself, now exceedingly rare, has become a collector's item. Bottles dated before 1990 fetch high prices at wizarding auctions. One such bottle, gifted to Dumbledore by Derwent herself, was rumoured to be used during the brewing of a calming draught for Fawkes, who once fell into a deep melancholy following a failed Phoenix courtship. "It helped him sleep," Dumbledore said cryptically. No record of the bees appears in standard magical bestiaries. Even Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them omits them. Newt Scamander's grandson, however, once claimed, in a footnote of his 2011 revised edition, "There exist whispers of song bees near Hogsmeade. I believe them to be real, though entirely beyond classification. They are music first, creature second." Today, students of Hogwarts occasionally hike past the edge of the village and swear they hear something on the wind, a high, clear note that fades if you try to follow it. The trees there seem older, the air lighter. Professor Sprout, in her final years at Hogwarts, told one curious 4th year, "The world is louder than it used to be. If you ever hear the quiet sing, don't interrupt, just listen." There was once a proposal by a group of enterprising young wizards to revive the Hollow and reintroduce the bees. The Ministry of Magic, however, denied the permit, citing environmental instability and lingering enchantments of unknown temperament. But unofficially, the rejection was due to the discovery of protective wards that still pulse faintly around the hilltop, reacting negatively to artificial magic. And so the legend of Hogsmeade's magical bees remains part of whispered tradition. Young witches and wizards still joke that if your hair suddenly stands on end during a visit to the Three Broomsticks, it means you've offended the spirit of the Hollow. Rosmerta, now older and retired, used to smile knowingly whenever asked about it. "Some sweetness," she once told a customer, "can't be bottled without music." The memory of Derwent and Trewin's dream lives on in the taste of a few remaining sweets and in the rare bottles passed down through wizarding families. Every now and then, a wandless spell seems to succeed on its own, or a charm lingers a bit longer than expected. And in those moments, some believe the harmonic honey still sings. Number 22, Madame Rosmerta's Mysterious Black Cat. In the warm, dim light of the Three Broomsticks Inn, with its creaking floorboards and hearth that never quite dies out, there's always a presence watching. Regular patrons know the sensation, the prickling at the back of the neck, the shift of air near their shoulders, and then green eyes in the shadows. Not eyes filled with menace, but intelligence. Eyes that weigh your intent and judge it in a heartbeat. These are the eyes of the black cat of Madame Rosmerta, and he has never once been named. They say he came with the building. Long before Madame Rosmerta owned the Three Broomsticks, the cat was seen curled on windowsills and gliding beneath the bar stools, silent as smoke. He was there when Aberforth Dumbledore frequented the place as a young man before opening the Hogshead. He was there when the Order of the Phoenix held their discreet conversations in the back booths. And always, always, he watched. Rosmerta, as sharp with charm as she is with fire whiskey, has never confirmed or denied his origin, but she keeps a bowl behind the counter, empty of food, filled only with fine grey dust. Once, in the autumn of 1983, a minor incident stirred among Hogwarts students that drew the cat's true nature into speculation. A group of Slytherins, daring and bored, tried to sneak a charmed bottle of fire whiskey into the tavern, hidden inside a transfigured quill case. As they approached the back booth, where Madame Rosmerta was speaking with a ministry official, the black cat leapt onto the table. No sound, no growl, just the thump of paws and a sudden gleam of green. The bottle shattered within the enchanted case, soaking their robes with smouldering cinnamon and shame. They ran. No one ever saw the cat jump down. Professor Flitwick, in a casual remark during a charms lesson years later, mentioned an unusual form of magical warding used in Hogsmeade buildings, residual auras left by animagi if the transformation is repeated often in one place. "It's quite subtle," he said, tapping his fingers against a stack of spell scrolls. "But if an animagus were to transform repeatedly within a confined area, over time, the structure itself would begin to remember the magic. Doors will open more quietly for them, spells hesitate, and sometimes things break when they shouldn't." He didn't say it, but every student listening thought the same thing. The cat. In 1996, during the second rise of Voldemort, Hogsmeade was not the safe haven it had once been. The village stood on alert, trembling under the weight of shadows and curses. Madame Rosmerta herself fell under the Imperious curse, used as a puppet by Draco Malfoy in his mission to bring Death Eaters into Hogwarts. Yet even then the cat was seen, slinking through the tavern's rafters, slipping past shadows that did not belong. When Katie Bell was cursed by the necklace just outside the village, a Hufflepuff student later swore that the black cat had followed the group from a distance, never approaching, but always there. Hannah Abbott, now the proprietress of the Leaky Cauldron, once confessed that during her early days as a student, she'd stayed behind during a Hogsmeade trip because she'd fallen ill. In the empty common room of Hufflepuff House, she sat reading, trying to distract herself. The fire flickered. She turned the page. When she looked up, the black cat was sitting in the chair, opposite her. At Hogwarts, not in the village. He blinked once and was gone. She never told anyone until long after the war. The cat's eyes, green, glowing, and unblinking, have become a symbol to the villagers. There is a superstition among the older residents: never lie inside the Three Broomsticks. It's not the staff that will catch you, nor your own guilt, but the cat. "He hears things," muttered Barnaby Muldoon, a retired cursebreaker who drinks 3 times a week beneath the crooked beam near the window. Not with ears, with something else. He hears what the soul says, not the tongue. There's a persistent tale among the younger students of Hogwarts that the black cat appears only to those who've committed a secret misdeed, cheating on OWLs, stealing from the hospital wing, sending cursed letters. One Gryffindor claimed she saw him twice in 1 week, and then promptly tripped during her apparition test and ended up splinched in 3 places. "It's the guilt," she whispered later, still pale from the experience. "It makes him stronger." No one has ever seen the cat sleep. No one has ever seen him eat. A Ravenclaw fascinated by magical biology once attempted to chart the cat's habits. Over the course of 3 months, she sat in the corner with a sketchbook, marking the cat's appearances. He was never there at opening or closing, but somehow always between. Sometimes on the bar, sometimes in the window, once perched above the door like a gargoyle. On 2 occasions he was in 2 places at once, seen by 2 separate witnesses, 5 minutes apart. The sketchbook was confiscated by Madame Pince. It hasn't been seen since. Mundungus Fletcher once tried to smuggle a cursed silver pocket watch into the tavern, hoping to trade it to a disreputable wizard from Knockturn Alley. As the deal began, the buyer looked over Fletcher's shoulder and bolted from the table. The thief turned, confused, and there was the cat, perched on the booth's ledge, tail flicking once. The pocket watch exploded in Fletcher's pocket before he could flee. He hasn't returned since. During a particularly stormy night in 1977, 2 Hogwarts students, one named Marlene McKinnon and the other Dorcas Meadows, sought refuge in the Three Broomsticks after encountering a hooded figure in the woods beyond the village. Rosmerta offered them sanctuary. As the tavern emptied and shutters buckled under the wind, the black cat sat on the counter, ears flat. At midnight, the door burst open, no footsteps, just howling air. The candles guttered, the cat leapt down, and the shadow vanished. Dorcas swore later that the cat had grown twice its size in that moment. Equinoxes are the strangest days in Hogsmeade. Not for the weather, which is usually dull, but for the atmosphere inside the tavern. Strange harmonics seem to hum along the beams, firelight dances more vividly. And on those days, the cat is said to whisper. Not in human words, not in meows, but something else. A rhythm, a code. Once, Seamus Finnegan leaned too close and went pale. He refused to explain what he'd heard. Not meant for us, was all he managed. Rosmerta herself offers no explanations. He's always been here, she once said, polishing a glass with more vigour than necessary. He stays because he chooses to. That's all. No name, no acknowledgement of the tales, but a knowing glance when asked. And on her left wrist, under the silver bangles, a small tattoo, a green eye, exactly like his. It is said that the cat's presence is what keeps the Three Broomsticks safe. That Death Eaters hesitated to raid it directly during the war, despite using Rosmerta. That darker creatures shy from the fireplace, that spilled secrets vanish into the floorboards, and perhaps most mysteriously, that a young woman from Beauxbatons once tried to buy the tavern outright, offering double its worth in galleons, contracts, and favours. Rosmerta declined, and the woman left fuming. Later that week, she was found near the forbidden forest's edge, trembling, eyes wild. The green eyes, she kept muttering. I didn't mean it. Hogsmeade, though touched by history and war, remains a place of stubborn magic. It is a village where broomsticks lean against pub doors like old friends, and ghosts of laughter linger in the fog. But among all its oddities, the black cat is the one constant, and those who visit enough times begin to see him not just as a legend, but a sentinel. A presence that guards not only the tavern, but perhaps something older, something buried beneath the planks and stone. Aberforth Dumbledore once remarked, "Some things in Hogsmeade are older than Hogwarts." He said it with a glance toward the Three Broomsticks. When asked what he meant, he only raised his tankard and muttered, "Ask the cat." But no one ever does, not directly, because deep down they fear the answer. One winter's evening, as the snow thickened and Hogwarts students bustled through the town wrapped in scarves, a boy slipped a flask of polyjuice potion into his pocket, intent on impersonating a prefect. As he crossed the threshold of the tavern, he heard a soft hiss. Not from any patron. The sound came from above. The cat sat on the rafter, tail curved like a hook. The flask shattered in the boy's coat, scalding him with its boiling mix. He never tried again. When Hermione Granger visited Hogsmeade after the war to assist in restoring magical safety protocols, she made a curious observation. "There's an anomaly in the Three Broomsticks enchantments," she wrote in a report for the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. "It's not ministry regulated, it responds to intentions, not spells. It has the quality of a sentient defense system, possibly tied to a living being or residual animagus transformation. Further research denied, subject refused observation. In the margins, someone scribbled in red ink, "The cat." In one of the few known references to the black cat in any official record, a parchment housed in the Department of Mysteries refers cryptically to a guardian unseen, stationed in Hogsmeade, unregistered animagus, non-hostile, high sensitivity to dark intent. It was catalogued in 1951 and hasn't been updated since. Visitors still come and go from the Three Broomsticks, butterbeer still flows, and the warmth of the fire draws laughter from deep chests. But sometimes a hush falls over the room. The candles flicker, the air tightens, and someone, always someone, glances over their shoulder for just a moment, for a presency, a glint of green, a flicker of tail. And then the tavern breathes again, safe in the knowledge that no ill deed will go unnoticed. In Hogsmeade, they do not fear the black cat, they respect him, and no one ever tries to pet him. Number 23, the magical weather station. Few visitors to Hogsmeade ever pay attention to the narrow alleyway tucked behind Madame Scribble's quill shop, where the smell of ink and parchment thickens the air. They rarely notice the crooked brass pipe jutting out from behind the stone chimney, or the strange humming sound that sometimes echoes at twilight. Yet behind those stacked barrels of empty inkpots and dusty scroll cases stands one of the oldest magical structures in the village, a building that has quietly dictated life around Hogwarts for more than 2 centuries. This is the Hogsmeade Weather Station, known in official ministry records as the Atmospheric Prognostication and Phenomenological Calibration Bureau. Locals simply call it the Whispering Spire. Constructed in 1789, the spire is believed to have been commissioned by the famed weather witch Temperantia Nettles, a Hufflepuff graduate who had grown weary of sudden downpours interrupting school events. Nettles devised a series of long-range enchantments that could read atmospheric pressure, magical density, and residual charms lingering in the sky. These spells were embedded in the stone itself, and her runes still glow faintly on clear nights. Over the years, the building has evolved through layers of enchantments, some intentional, others accidental, many forgotten. The result is a structure that hums with quiet power and occasionally shivers as if sneezing invisible clouds. Inside, the weather station is smaller than one might expect. Its cramped control room is filled with hovering orbs of condensed air pressure and cloud essence rotating slowly over copper dishes. A blackboard updates itself hourly with predictions scrawled in quick, zigzagging lines. The room smells of ozone and old paper. A spherical compass embedded into the floor spins erratically on days when anomalies are brewing. From the tower's single window, one can see both the Forbidden Forest and the Quidditch pitch, which was no accident, according to archival notes found in the office of Rolanda Hooch. Indeed, Professor McGonagall was known to consult the station when planning Quidditch matches. "She always picked the clearest days," noted Madame Rosmerta once, pouring mulled mead for curious tourists. Even when the sky looked like it might crack open with snow, she'd say, "Nonsense, the spire says blue skies." And by Merlin, blue they were. In McGonagall's private logbook, now preserved in the Hogwarts archives, she recorded a dozen such instances. On 12th of March 1982, for example, she postponed a match between Gryffindor and Slytherin due to a predicted sweet storm. The next day, the sky burst into a downpour of honeyed licorice, staining the pitch for weeks. These odd events are not rare. The spire's predictions cover not just natural elements but magical phenomena known to affect students and staff. Hailstones that whisper riddles, gusts of wind carrying phantom footsteps, and once a fog that caused time to briefly skip. Such events are noted and charted. A parchment dating back to 1891 describes an evening snow that animated all snowmen on Hogwarts grounds. For several hours the figures danced, saluted professors, and engaged in a small-scale snowball war against enchanted suits of armour. The ministry declared it a harmless incident, but Headmaster Everard insisted on an emergency staff meeting afterward. Few people know who currently tends the station. Officially, it is self-regulating, maintained by legacy enchantments and assisted by a series of charmed quills and maintenance sprites. But villagers whisper about a hooded figure seen entering the station on the first Thursday of each month, carrying a basket of peppermint toffee and a battered tome titled Climatic Manipulation in Enchanted Biomes. According to Aberforth Dumbledore, who once glimpsed the figure near midnight, "The Spire don't like being taken for granted. I reckon someone's been saying thank you." That might explain one of the station's peculiar behaviours. If not properly acknowledged for its accuracy, it begins to misbehave. On 7 October 1975, Headmaster Dippet failed to file a routine gratitude charm. The following week, a hurricane of talking leaves descended on the village, each leaf reciting lines from the Standard Book of Spells Grade 4 in an Irish brogue. 3 shopkeepers lost their voices for a fortnight due to magical pollen. In her memoir, Celestina Warbeck described it as the most theatrical autumn storm I ever witnessed, though the leaves had more charm than some of my critics. One particularly memorable incident occurred on 4 December 1994. That morning, as students prepared for a Hogsmeade weekend, the Spire recorded high emotional pressure with a 70% chance of animated snowfall. Professor Flitwick, curious and mildly concerned, performed a brief scrying charm to confirm the station's reading. By noon, every snowflake in the village began to shimmer with soft blue light. As snow accumulated, it started sculpting itself into human-like forms, sentries in scarves, owls mid-flight, even a likeness of Headmaster Dumbledore reading the Daily Prophet. The figures moved gracefully, offering bows and gentle nods to passing witches and wizards. The magic lasted just 8 hours, fading as twilight fell. Yet those present swore it was the most peaceful day they had ever experienced. Honeydukes saw record sales as enchanted snowmen queued for sweets, while the Three Broomsticks served mugs of hot cocoa to students accompanied by snowfox companions. "It was like the world paused to smile," wrote Luna Lovegood in her personal diary, now held in the Lovegood collection at the Quibbler Museum. Over the years, magical researchers have tried to unravel the Spire's secrets. One such figure was Elbert Knoxtail, a Ravenclaw meteorologist who lived briefly in Hogsmeade during the 1930s. His extensive notes, though partially charred from a self-igniting cloudburst in 1934, suggest that the station is powered by a network of ley lines intersecting beneath the village. Knoxtail theorized that the Spire did not merely predict the weather, it also influenced it, tuning ambient magical fields to ensure equilibrium. He was last seen entering the station during a lightning storm, and though he never emerged, his journal was found dry and intact on the tower's threshold the next morning. Ministry officials have long debated regulating or dismantling the station, citing concerns about its autonomy. But whenever such motions are raised, the Department of Magical Infrastructure receives anonymous weather reports predicting their office plants will wither or their tea kettles will boil sideways. Such events have occurred with unnerving precision. Dolores Umbridge once proposed relocating the Spire to London for better monitoring. The next day, a cloud resembling a frowning toad followed her from the Floo network exit all the way to her ministry cubicle, drizzling vinegar and ink onto her parchment. She never brought it up again. Even Severus Snape acknowledged the station's usefulness. Though he loathed Hogsmeade weekends, he was once overheard noting, "At least the children return dry most of the time." In a rare annotation found inside his personal copy of Advanced Potion Making, he jotted, "Spire reliable, predicts atmospheric changes affecting fluxweed potency, consult before brewing." This note, circled in green ink, is now displayed behind glass at the Hogwarts Library exhibition wing. The villagers themselves, though often indifferent to the structure, have their superstitions. Before major events, weddings, owl racing tournaments, or the annual Enchanted Sweets Festival, someone is always sent to place a token of thanks at the Spire's brass threshold, a silver sickle, a folded paper crane, a bit of treacle tart wrapped in tartan cloth. The station never demands these offerings, yet when they are forgotten, rain follows like an offended cousin. During the Second Wizarding War, the spire served a quieter, more vital role. Its upper chamber was used by members of the Order of the Phoenix to send coded weather messages to allies. A snowstorm with green sparkles meant it was safe to travel. Thunder that hummed lullabies signaled an urgent meeting. Tonks once joked that the spire was more reliable than the ministry's entire communication staff, and records show that its predictions saved at least 2 patrols from ambushes near the Shrieking Shack. There's a plaque now beside the station, half buried in ivy, reading, "For services rendered in days dark and light, the spire stood still and saw us through." The ministry denies placing it. Some say it appeared one morning, etched by frost, that refused to melt. What makes the station endure is not just its predictive precision, but its personality, if that word can be used for a building. It sulks, it celebrates, it remembers, it has no face, no voice, yet it shapes the rhythm of Hogsmeade like a conductor guiding invisible instruments. Children passing by often wave. Some whisper their secrets to the bricks, asking for sunny birthdays or snowy Christmas mornings. Most say their wishes come true. The Whispering Spire is not found on most tourist maps. It doesn't feature in Hogwarts brochures or chocolate frog cards. Yet its shadow touches every flag fluttering over the Quidditch pitch, every icicle hanging from Zonko's roof, every breeze that smells of cinnamon and distant laughter. It is a relic of the quiet magic that runs deep beneath the cobbled streets and chimney tops of Hogsmeade, a spell cast not with wands, but with tradition, reverence, and mystery. And perhaps the next time snow falls gently across the village and the candles in the windows flicker just so, one might glance toward the alley behind the quill shop and catch for a moment the glint of a copper weather vane spinning in silent celebration. Number 24. The letter found in the bench. One autumn afternoon in late October, a Ravenclaw student named Elias Whitcomb found himself wandering the cobbled lanes of Hogsmeade. The chill of the season had begun to settle in, casting a sleepy hush over the village. Most students were gathered at the Three Broomsticks or perusing Honeydukes for early Halloween treats, but Elias, with his usual curious disposition, strayed toward the quiet square near the old well at the heart of the village. There, between the post office and Gladrags, stood a weather-worn wooden bench, partially shaded by the gnarled branches of a wizened ash tree. He sat down, rubbing his hands together for warmth, and felt the slight tremor of something shifting beneath him. Elias leaned forward, inspecting the space between the bench's aged wooden slats. Something crinkled faintly, almost imperceptibly like dry parchment stirred by breath. Curious, he slipped his fingers into the gap and extracted a folded, dusty envelope, sealed with wax so faded it appeared nearly colorless. The texture of the paper was brittle, its corners curled from age. There was no visible sender's name, but the front read simply, "To Janie." The handwriting was looping and elegant, the ink barely faded despite the envelope's clear antiquity. On its back, the seal had a faintly discernible serpent, coiled and etched with runes that shimmered slightly, then dulled, as if hiding their glow. Back at Hogwarts, Elias showed the letter to his head of house, Professor Flitwick, who consulted with the history of magic professor, a meticulous witch named Emmeline Voss. She recognized the seal as one used unofficially by a secret Slytherin society in the late 19th century. The Serpent's Whisper, she explained, was less of a club and more of a hidden tradition. Students who practiced charms of concealment and secrecy, often around emotional or poetic correspondence. According to Professor Voss, the game they played revolved around hiding enchanted messages in Hogsmeade, each letter cloaked in unique magic that would reveal its words only under precise conditions. Curious about the contents, Elias tried every charm he knew to break the enchantment. Nothing worked. It wasn't until the next full moon during a late walk across the astronomy tower grounds that Elias remembered the letter. With no expectations, he held it under the moonlight. To his astonishment, ink began to bloom across the parchment in graceful strokes, revealing an emotional outpouring from a boy whose name had been forgotten by history. except for what was captured in that letter. The letter was from a young man named Thaddeus Mulberry, a Slytherin 6th year, addressed to a Hufflepuff girl named Janie Evercreech. Thaddeus wrote of hidden glances across the Great Hall, of secret duels watched from the shadowed edge of the Forbidden Forest, of notes passed during potions class. "You hold the kind of warmth the dungeons never knew," he wrote. "I know the world will not smile on a Slytherin and a Hufflepuff in 1893, not without consequence, but if the moonlight reaches you, then know this: my heart has already found its keeper." What made the letter remarkable wasn't only its sentiment, but the nature of the magic it bore. Professor Voss explained that charms used to conceal love letters in that era were complex and personal, tied to celestial conditions, specific herbs, or even the emotional states of the sender. This particular letter was linked to the lunar cycle, a symbol of constancy and secrecy. Its discovery under the full moon suggested that Thaddeus wanted his confession to be read only when the world was at its most honest, bathed in silver truth. A passage in Hogwarts, a history, mentions an uptick in detentions during the 1890s, citing unsanctioned student activity in Hogsmeade involving encoded correspondences and magical scavenger hunts. This fits the theory that students of that era created an informal tradition, half courtship, half challenge, where confessions, riddles, or even hexes were hidden throughout the village, activated only by those who shared their understanding of secrecy and devotion. It's believed that the Serpent's Whisper was not exclusive to Slytherins by the end of the decade, though they remained its originators. One theory proposed by Emmeline Voss and later published in the Wizarding Almanac of Hidden Histories posits that Thaddeus never intended for Janie to find the letter. Instead, it was part of a larger game where emotional truths were shared without expectation of reply, a kind of catharsis through concealment. Yet other scholars argue that Janie must have known. Records show she became a herbology professor at Ilvermorny decades later, and among her possessions was found a moonstone brooch inscribed with a serpent motif and the initials TM. No further letters from Thaddeus have ever been found, though Elias and other students combed Hogsmeade for months. A rumour spread that another letter lies hidden in the ruins of the Hog's Head cellar, accessible only during a thunderstorm. Another legend claims a charmed diary belonging to Janie is buried near the Shrieking Shack, and that her entries respond to moonlight in reverse, fading entirely when exposed to it, leaving only blank pages as if to protect their contents. Thaddeus Mulberry's name is not in any official record of disciplinary action, nor does he appear in the Slytherin House registers held in the library's restricted section. Yet there is a mulberry crest on one of the old green banners stored in the castle's attic, a crest that bears both a serpent and a crescent moon. This suggests that the letter's author might have been expunged from official records, or perhaps chose to disappear from the known wizarding world entirely. Janie, however, seems to have lived on, quietly, her story hidden between pages of dried leaves and faded ink. There is a peculiar note in the diary of Headmistress Everard, written in 1893. Two students caught wandering near the old wishing well after curfew claim they were chasing moonlight confessions. I remember such nonsense from my own youth, foolish games, though charming. I won't expel them, but I've assigned them to polish every suit of armour in the West Wing. Perhaps that will scrub away a bit of their romance. This small comment suggests the phenomenon of enchanted letters was known to staff, if not officially acknowledged. What makes the story endure, however, is not just the magic of the letter or the poetry of Thaddeus's words. It is the proof that even in a world of spells and incantations, the deepest magic is often rooted in vulnerability. The letter's enchantment was intricate not just because it was hard to break, but because it was built on the hope that someone might find it without ever being told where to look. As Professor Voss often said, magic reveals itself to the seeker, not the searcher. Elias eventually donated the letter to the Hogsmeade Historical Archive, though copies of it are kept in the Ravenclaw Common Room, where its discovery has become something of a legend. First years are told that if they sit on the same bench under the right conditions, they may hear whispers of old magic, or feel warmth in the wood, a flicker of affection from another time. Some believe the bench itself has absorbed the enchantment and may someday reveal another hidden message. In the winter following his discovery, Elias received a small parcel by owl post. Inside was a folded slip of parchment, no envelope, no name. It read, "Not all secrets are buried. Some are waiting to be seen again." The writing matched none of the professor's. The letter vanished when he read it a second time. Whether this was a prank or a continuation of the serpent's whisper, he never found out. There is still speculation among magical historians about how many such enchanted letters may remain in Hogsmeade. With the changing architecture, repairs, and magical warding over the decades, it's possible that dozens, if not hundreds, have been erased or sealed beyond reach. Others could be sleeping in stone, waiting for just the right phrase, the right touch, or the right person to awaken them. As one passage in Magical Mischief and Hidden Charms notes, Hogwarts students may leave the castle, but their magic often lingers long after their footsteps vanish. Janie's life after Hogwarts remains a tapestry of mysteries. She was never married, lived alone on the outskirts of New York's Wizarding District, and was known for tending a rare moonflower garden that only bloomed once a year, always under the full moon. Her neighbours described her as quiet, gentle, and prone to humming old Scottish lullabies, songs not popular in America at the time. One wizarding poet claimed to have seen her weep during the lunar bloom, pressing her fingers to a silver brooch hidden beneath her collar. Some believe that the moon itself has a memory, that it holds echoes of what it once illuminated. The letter from Thaddeus to Janie was not just an object, it was a spell cast across time, a whisper that lived in the hush of a quiet village and the hush of a hopeful heart. The bench in Hogsmeade has never been repaired or replaced by order of the current mayor, who, it is said, found his own letter beneath it as a student and has never spoken of what it said. Now and then, under a full moon, visitors to Hogsmeade pause beside the old bench, some on dares, others in reverence. A few claim to hear soft rustling or see shadows form words upon the ground. Whether real or imagined, the tradition persists, not because of certainty, but because of belief. The kind of belief that Slytherins rarely get credit for, the kind that writes love letters no one may ever read and hides them anyway. Number 25. The Night Watchman. Nobody hired. They call him the Lantern Watchman, though no one remembers when the name first began to circulate through Hogsmeade. It's always said with hushed reverence by the shopkeepers of Honeydukes and whispered with caution by the bartenders of the Three Broomsticks. The students of Hogwarts who sneak into the village on winter nights, wrapped in their cloaks and emboldened by mischief, sometimes return pale-faced, speaking of a figure that glides silently between the shadows. No one has ever heard his voice, no one has ever seen his face, and yet his presence is as much a part of Hogsmeade as the snow-dusted rooftops or the enchanted candles in Madame Puddifoot's tea shop. He appears only after midnight, long after the streets have emptied and the lights in the windows have dimmed. A tall figure, shrouded in a tattered hooded cloak that seems to soak in the night, walks the cobbled paths with measured steps. In his left hand, always, is a lantern that glows not gold nor white, but blue, a steady, cold light that does not flicker with the wind nor dim in the rain. It casts an eerie glow on the stone and ice, revealing footprints that disappear as quickly as they appear. One bitter November, just a year after the Battle of Hogwarts, Aberforth Dumbledore stood outside the Hogshead Inn, watching the lantern glide past his window. "I never hired a watchman," he told himself aloud. He lit his pipe, but didn't inhale. The air was too still. The figure passed silently, head bowed, cloak brushing the ground. The goats inside the pub grew restless every time the blue light approached, as if they could sense something no human could. The stories grew with time, but there was no denying one fact. Ever since the Lantern Watchman began his nightly patrols, Hogsmeade had become a safer place. Reports of dark activity had all but vanished. Even during the height of the renewed threats from scattered Death Eaters, when Travers was last seen not far from Knockturn Alley, no incidents were reported in the village. The Ministry's Aura Office quietly noted that Hogsmeade remained anomalously secure. Madame Rosmerta, once wary of anything unexplained, eventually grew used to the figure. She watched from behind her bar each night as the blue glow passed outside the frosted windows. "He's like the old protective charms," she once confided to Hermione Granger when the latter visited on ministry business. "You don't know how they work, but they make you feel like someone's watching over you." Hermione did more than listen. In her second year as deputy head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, she commissioned an investigation into the figure. The report, compiled by the young and ambitious Aura Emmeline Bletchley, was inconclusive. "No magical residue consistent with standard illusions," it read. "No known magical signature, no trace of polyjuice, no evidence of corporeality. Attempts to follow the figure end in disappearance after contact with direct light." The watchman, it seemed, did not appreciate being pursued. And yet, when danger came near, the watchman intervened. In the winter of 2005, 2 masked figures were spotted near the Shrieking Shack. Their wands glowed faintly, their breath visible in the moonlight. They moved silently, attempting to breach the magical wards that still encased the ruined house. A third-year student from Hogwarts, Annie Macmillan, niece of Ernie Macmillan, had wandered too far from her classmates during a Hogsmeade weekend and nearly crossed their path. She would later describe what happened next in her own words. "A blue light cut through the snow. It blinded everyone for a moment. When I opened my eyes, the men were gone, and something tall was walking away. It didn't speak, but it looked at me. I think it knew who I was." The ministry found no trace of the attackers, but they did find Annie safely waiting near the post office with a trail of small blue footprints in the snow leading away. Speculation about the watchman's identity is endless. Some believe he is the ghost of Godric Gryffindor himself, long bound to the village he once helped defend. Others suggest he's a forgotten guardian from the First Wizarding War, someone who died in anonymity and now serves in silence. But one theory carries particular weight among those who knew Albus Dumbledore well, that the watchman is a living enchantment, an act of protective magic Dumbledore set into motion before his death. It is no secret that Albus Dumbledore was fond of Hogsmeade. He visited the village often, not only to speak with Aberforth, but to feel the pulse of the magical community outside the walls of Hogwarts. During his final years, he was said to have grown more protective of the area. "This village has a life of its own," he once said to Minerva McGonagall, according to her memoir. "It watches over the school just as the school watches over it." Several obscure enchantments preserved in Dumbledore's private notes and later archived at the Hogwarts Library reference the idea of sentient ward, protections that evolve, observe, and adapt over time. One passage buried deep in his notes on transsentient spells reads, "To give light the will to protect is to plant consciousness in vigilance. A lantern may burn long after the hand that lit it has turned to dust." The Lantern Watchman has never entered Hogwarts, but he always circles its outer path before vanishing with the dawn. On rare occasions, he has been seen standing atop the hill near the railway station, lantern held high, as if watching the horizon. On one such morning, Headmistress McGonagall herself noted his presence to the staff. "He was not a man," she told them. "He was something older than fear and more precise than magic." Hogsmeade, despite its charm, has always been close to danger. The Shrieking Shack, long associated with dark energy and tragic events, remains a source of unease. Many believe it is this place the watchman watches most carefully. Before Sirius Black's name was cleared, before Severus Snape's legacy was reclaimed, the shack held nothing but silence and shame. But now many feel it is guarded, and not merely by magic. Even the centaurs of the Forbidden Forest have acknowledged the watchman. Firenze, once a professor at Hogwarts, later told Luna Lovegood in an interview for the Quibbler, "There is a presence on the edge of your human village. It walks with purpose, but without flesh. It does not belong to our kind, but we respect its duty." There is no known record of the watchman ever harming a soul. When approached directly, he vanishes. Auras have attempted spells to slow or mark him, but they pass through without effect. Once, Harry Potter himself, during a brief assignment inspecting magical threats across Britain, stood watch in Hogsmeade for 3 nights, hoping to witness the watchman firsthand. On the 3rd night, just before dawn, he saw the blue light move silently across the frozen street. Harry never spoke publicly of the event, but later, in an informal conversation with Neville Longbottom, he said only, "I think I understand now why Dumbledore never feared the dark." Some villagers have grown to leave offerings on cold benches and doorsteps, mufflers, scraps of enchanted cloth, small runes carved into stone with gratitude. They believe that the watchman notices. One such villager, old Agnes Clearwater, claims that ever since she left a glowing rune of protection on her doorstep, the blue light has lingered there just a little longer each night. Skeptics remain, of course. The Daily Prophet ran an editorial in 2007 questioning the village's superstitious obsession with folklore. Rita Skeeter, in her usual flair for mockery, wrote, "Hogsmeade may as well declare itself a theme park of haunted lanterns and ghostly goats." But even she did not risk visiting the village after dark. Over time, the watchman has entered the lore of the village. Children grow up hearing stories of his silent steps. Students dare one another to glimpse his lantern from behind barrels or doorways, and visiting wizards sometimes try to summon him with charms or glowing lights of their own. None succeed. The watchman never approaches when called. He comes only when needed. A woman in the early stages of labour, lost in a snowstorm after leaving St. Mungo's too soon, later told her healer that a blue light guided her through the woods and to the edge of the village. When she turned to thank him, there was no one there. Perhaps the most curious part of it all is this: no photograph or painting has ever captured him. Magical cameras yield only blank images. Portraits painted based on witness descriptions come out strangely distorted, as if the figure refuses to be seen in full. Even the pensive memory donated by Annie Macmillan shows only snow and flickers of blue light, not the watchman himself. But his impact cannot be denied. In the years since his first appearance, no known dark artifacts have entered Hogsmeade. No injuries from magical attacks have been reported. Even Zonko's joke shop, once a magnet for trouble, has found fewer reasons to ward its shelves. Some joke that even mischievous magic fears the watchman's gaze. Still, no one knows what he is. Not for certain. But perhaps that's why he endures. Hogsmeade doesn't need answers. It needs guardianship. And in a world where spells fade and buildings crumble, sometimes all it takes is a silent figure, a steady step, and a lantern that never goes out.